Hi, welcome to the History Respawn podcast. I'm your host, Bob Whitaker. On today's episode, we'll be having a conversation with Esther Wright about her new book on Rockstar games and American history. But before I get to that interview, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the goings-on with historical games in the past couple of weeks. And in particular, taking a look at the news that came out of Ubi Forward. This is Ubisoft's kind of promotional event that occurred back on September 10th. So this is obviously important for people interested in historical games because Ubisoft is the developer and publisher of the Assassin's Creed series. And so in addition to Assassin's Creed, they also mentioned other games, discussed future titles. And so it was a kind of a grab bag promotional event building towards a specific look at the Assassin's Creed series in the next couple of years. So I was just going to go through some of the news that came out of this promotional event, and this is following a article that was written up on Eurogamer. And kind of the early bit of news that came out of this event was regarding Skull and Bones, which, as we've talked about on the show before, is Ubisoft's kind of long in development MMO-style pirate game. And, you know, this is a game that's supposed to come out this year, supposedly, I think, in late October, early November. And the only kind of new bit of information that I got out of this press release regarding Skull and Bones was the fact that it's going to be set in the Indian Ocean during the Age of Sail. So if you'll remember, this has kind of always been touted as a pirate game, you know, kind of classic golden age of piracy. And I assumed throughout that time that meant they would be in the Caribbean. But in fact, it looks like the game's narrative, kind of the multiplayer maps, etc., are going to be set in the Indian Ocean. So I think that's interesting. You know, there is a lot going on in the Indian Ocean, particularly in the 18th century. And it's an area of the world that I don't think gets a lot of attention from, you know, popular accounts about history. You know, certainly there are some shows and some movies that relate to the activities of the British East India Company. In particular, you can think of the Pirates of the Caribbean series from Disney. But you know, I can't really think of a game that has gone into this territory other than kind of a grand strategy game like Total War Empire. So I think that's fascinating. Now, as far as the way the game looks, you know, it does have that naval combat from Assassin's Creed Black Flag. You know, it does look like that sort of game just kind of blown out of proportion into a multiplayer kind of setting. And so I'm really curious as to how that's going to pan out, how that's going to work. You know, is that going to be successful to them? It does kind of feel like this project, which has been in development for a really long time, is all of a sudden getting rushed out of the door for some reason. So who knows? Who knows what that means for the final product? The next bit of news is kind of a strange one, was that Ubisoft announced at this event that they are in a partnership with Netflix, the streaming provider, and that as part of this partnership, they are going to be releasing a new Valiant Hearts game for mobile devices. So if you don't remember, Valiant Hearts, World War I game that was kind of I guess you could say kind of an indie title in terms of its production value and in terms of its length. And it's something that was one of the first games that we covered for History Respawn, I think back in 2014, 2015. I did a solo episode on Valiant Hearts when it first came out. It was a solo episode that I was trying to get under 8 minutes in order to attract YouTube viewers. to the show, and this episode was one of our first big duds in terms of viewership, because it was just me talking for about, I think it was like 6 to 8 minutes. And I remember the early view count on that video was like maybe 500 people. That was bad, not great. But regardless of how popular that video was for History Respawn, Valiant Hearts is a really good historical game. It gives you a lot to kind of chew on when it comes to representation of the First World War in games. It was kind of one of the first recent titles, in saying the last 10 years, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the First World War. And it's also a really good game, I think, to recommend to students or to recommend to other educators for use in a class that might want to look at historical games rather than doing a historical movie or a book or something like that. Because Valiant Hearts was relatively inexpensive, and it also ran on just about anything. And I want to say they also had a mobile version for iPad and for Apple devices, Apple iPhones. And so it's really exciting to me to hear that this Ubisoft Netflix partnership is going to lead to the release of a new Valiant Hearts game, and that this Valiant Hearts game will also, this new version, will also feature developers from that first game. I thought that first game was a huge success, and so it's really exciting to hear that there's a new one coming out, and I'm really curious to see it. And then in addition to the news about a Ubisoft and Netflix partnership for the development of a new game, we've also got news about an Assassin's Creed live-action series, which will debut on Netflix at some point. And so, this has also been kind of a topic for History Respawn. If you'll remember back when the Assassin's Creed movie came out with Michael Fassbender, also known as Assassin's Creed, that we covered that here on History Respawn. And, so we've had that film. It wasn't a huge success, wasn't a critical success or financial success. But apparently there's enough there to interest Netflix, and they finance just about any show, live action, animated adaptation you can think of under the sun. So, we'll see. I don't know. And, how much are they going to, cleave to the stories in the games? I have no idea. So that was kind of it for, the non-Assassin's Creed series news with Ubisoft. And so at the end of this Ubi Forward event, they cap things off with an Assassin's Creed showcase. And if you are interested in seeing this showcase, you can go and type up Assassin's Creed 2022 showcase, and it'll take you to this segment. It's about a 15-minute segment at the end of Ubisoft Forward. Maybe it's a bit longer than that. I don't know. I don't have the YouTube information right in front of me, but good bit of information. There was kind of a sizzle reel as part of this to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the first Assassin's Creed, and the sizzle reel was filled with all sorts of heavy-handed, history-infused slogans. So I'll read some off to you here. This video included things like, quote, "History is your playground." Also, quote, "Leap into history." And then furthermore, "Be the thorn in history's side." And then finally, quote, "The greatest playground, ... history." So a lot going on there, a lot of appeals to, historical settings, a lot of appeals to kind of reliving the past, leaping into the past. And, I think when we talk to Esther at the end of this episode, you kind of see the ways in which these promotional slogans are important for kind of setting up the player's expectations. So there's quite a few of these slogans here coming in this Assassin's Creed showcase. All right, so what about the games? What did they talk about? Well, The first big one is that they announced the next Assassin's Creed main series game called Assassin's Creed Mirage. And this is a game that is going to come out in fall of next year, fall 2023. And this story in Assassin's Creed Mirage, it follows Basim, who is a major character in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and it follows him in medieval Baghdad. So I think just before the events of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is set in England. And from what they've said and from what they've shown in the game's trailer, this looks to be a game that is going to offer up something to old players like me who miss the older version of Assassin's Creed, which is focused on stealth and parkour and setting up assassination targets. And this game Mirage looks like it's going to be smaller scale, maybe just focused on the city of Baghdad, and then also kind of more tightly focused on a simpler narrative than the kind of sprawling, complicated, multi-layered narrative that you got from more recent titles, going back to Origins, Odyssey, and then finally with Valhalla. So this is something I didn't think we'd ever see again. I just assumed that all future Assassin's Creed titles were going to be in the mold of Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla. They were going to be these very complicated, sprawling 50, 60-hour open world RPGs. But here we are with Mirage, and it looks like they're kind of refocusing on, the kind of the starting point for Assassin's Creed as a series. Assassin's Creed 1, and then going through the Ezio trilogy, etc. Kind of getting back to that model of gameplay, which I think is pretty exciting. I don't want to speak for everybody. Obviously, I haven't really talked to John in detail about this, but I miss that model. I miss playing a game that was kind of over and done with in 20 hours or so, 16 hours. I'm not really feeling these more open-ended RPGs. It's not to say they're bad. It's not really what I'm looking for anymore as a player. So I think this is great. This is interesting news. I'm more interested in Assassin's Creed because of this news. And then in addition to Mirage, this showcase announced Assassin's Creed Codename Jade, which is a mobile-based game that is going to be set in ancient China. In addition to Jade, there's also Assassin's Creed Codename Red, which is going to be an RPG-focused game set in feudal Japan. So this could be a game that's a bit more like more recent titles like Valhalla, Odyssey, Origin. And then there was also another title, Assassin's Creed Codename, called Hexe. And this is a game that they didn't go into a huge amount of detail. It's kind of got an undetermined style and genre, but the trailer makes it look like it's going to be maybe a horror game. And this is a game that is also being led in development by Clint Hawking. Clint Hawking, most recently having worked on Watch Dogs 3 for Ubisoft, is kind of a very famous developer, somebody with a very particular and interesting perspective on player engagement and use of NPCs in games. And so I'm really curious. Hawking is a name that a lot of people associate with good games. And so, to see him get a chance to work on an Assassin's Creed title, I think it's pretty interesting. So, again, 3 code names. We've got Jade, set in China, Red, set in feudal Japan, finally in feudal Japan, and then lastly, Hexe, which don't really know the setting, but I assume it's some sort of horror game or horror action survival game. And so I don't imagine with these announced titles that we are actually going to end up calling them Codename Jade and Codename Red. I think these are just kind of early release names or, announcement names. But, I think in all of these we have got kind of Ubisoft are trying multiple approaches. On the one hand, we've got them releasing a story-focused mobile game. In Jade, we've got them releasing another RPG game with Codename Red, set in feudal Japan, which is kind of a long-standing wish of the Assassin's Creed community. And then with Hexe, we've got them kind of extending themselves, I feel like, trying something a bit different. And, it almost feels like they're kind of throwing anything at the wall just to see what will stick, which is exciting on the one hand, but it also makes you wonder, are they feeling a little desperate with the direction of Assassin's Creed? I don't know anything about the inner workings of Ubisoft, but it just seems a little odd that they would be trying to go in so many different directions all at once. And, I assume they've got the teams in line to complete all of this work, but I don't know. And, of course, in the midst of all this, promotional work by Ubisoft in Ubisoft Forward, and with the Assassin's Creed showcase, it's really important to remember also that Ubisoft is still under a cloud of related to harassment at Ubisoft over the past decade. And of course, that story hasn't gone away. You see it mentioned, of course, in most of the articles related to Ubisoft Forward, and Ubisoft themselves have made direct references to it in the press in and around this event. So, it's strange, I think. I think Mirage announcing the next big game, that's something you would expect. But these 3 Codename games all at once, it's just a lot. Now, in terms of education, in terms of, kind of using Assassin's Creed in the classroom, potential utility there, I think I'm most interested in Codename Jade, the mobile game, because that says to me that there's an opportunity for students to engage with the Assassin's Creed series. It doesn't necessarily involve having the latest console or having a top-grade PC like you would with AC Mirage or with potentially Codename Red or Hexe. So I think in terms of kind of classroom, I'm really interested in that, using Jade and seeing what that's like on mobile. And, I think in general, historical game studies, they've shown a preference for looking at considering AAA titles that appear on Steam, that appear on consoles, and that's certainly been the case with the History Respawn. But I think one of the big areas of interest for me going forward is mobile gaming, particularly seeing how younger students approach technology, how, some of them don't have a console, don't have a desktop PC, but they do have the latest phones, the latest tablets, and that's how they interact with games, including historical games. So I think that's a smart bet by Ubisoft. Setting it in ancient China too, I think opens up obviously the Chinese market, which is always something that's very interesting to developers. And so, yeah, I think, coming out of this event, I'm curious to see Ubisoft, how they move forward. Are they able to move forward with these issues of allegations of assault, etc., workplace harassment? But then in addition to that, I think I'm interested to see Mirage, and then also to see Jade, Codename Jade, which again, I assume we're not going to have that title forever. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but it just seems kind of clunky in terms of game titles. Okay, well, I think that does it for recent game news, and so I'm going to transition over to an interview that I recorded earlier this week with Esther Wright. Just as a reminder, Esther Wright is lecturer in digital history at Cardiff University, and Dr. Wright's research considers the representation of 20th century American history by Rockstar Games. And in particular, she studies the promotional strategies employed to sell historical authenticity of Rockstar titles. And in particular, she looks at Red Dead Redemption, Red Dead series, and then also LA Noire. And in addition to this research, Esther is also a co-convener of the Historical Games Network, which has been profiled in an episode of the History Respawn podcast. And so Esther, as you know, hopefully, if you've been a long-time listener, has been on many episodes of History Respawned, has been a guest in particular on our episode for Red Dead Redemption 2. And during all of that time, we've been eagerly anticipating the publication of Esther's book, and it is here. It's finally here. And the book is entitled Rockstar Games and American History: Promotional Materials and the Construction of Authenticity. And this is published by De Gruyter Press. So thanks for listening, and here's my interview with Esther Wright. Okay, Esther, welcome back to History Respawned.
Thanks for inviting me back. It's great to be here.
Of course. I'm very excited about your book. I'm very excited to actually read it. And so I thought, I don't know how well the audience is aware of your previous work, but you've been looking at Rockstar for quite a long time through your postgraduate work and then now with your monograph. And I'm wondering, just as kind of just to understand your process, why study Rockstar to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a particular company, I suppose, that always attracts a certain amount of attention, whether that's from kind of critics or fans or, academics, it's going to be a company like Rockstar. And at the time when I started sort of deciding what my PhD project was essentially gonna look like in sort of 2014, 2015, beyond some sort of articles or book chapters or the fact that Grand Theft Auto is, a really common touchstone for sort of game studies and kind of academic work on games. There hadn't really been sort of like a book length study of the company at that point. Or anything that had looked beyond sort of really specific aspects of their games. So it seemed like a really kind of good, a nice case study for my PhD anyway, but also, again, not only a company that gets lots of attention for just their games, but a company that's obviously so committed to representing different aspects of America as literally part of their brand sort of image and what it is that they do. It's sort of the American kind of mostly urban and sometimes obviously not urban experience, the kind of the Rockstar vision, the Rockstar kind of game being very much bound up with Americana in lots of different ways. So it kind of fitted what I was doing at that point and being really interested in the way that American history was representing different kinds of media and then focusing on games for the PhD. And I think beyond that, even just personally, they're a kind of developer brand that I just find really interesting for what they're doing, and felt that I kind of obviously had a lot to say about them and wanted to spend that, long amount of time thinking about what it was they were doing.
Yeah, it's such an important brand for the last 20 years. I mean, you think about the release of Grand Theft Auto 3 in particular, and I just turned 40. And so I was right in the kind of wheelhouse for that game. And, I was aware of Rockstar when they were developing the kind of top-down GTA games, GTA 1 and then GTA 2, which I think is also historical, set in London in the late 60s. And those games kind of had a cult following, but even back then, Rockstar was associated with the type of games they were selling, but then also the brand, right? The kind of this is a Rockstar title, and so I think it's really useful, in your book, that you're looking at the kind of brand, but then also the propaganda of that brand, the promotional material for that brand. So I'm wondering, could you describe for our listeners, what kind of sources are you using for this book and why are you focusing on promotional material?
Yeah, I mean, completely, as you say, there's so much about Rockstar's history as a developer and the way what they themselves have been trying to do has been trying to curate this kind of image of themselves as Rockstar and what that brand sort of encapsulates. And one of the things that I did sort of when I really kind of started to get a sense of understanding what this project was like I have a whole chapter that kind of made it a little bit into only the intro in the book on the kind of Rockstar brand, because I kind of want to do at some point something bigger with it when I actually get over having written one book, maybe do something else. But yeah, it's really bound up in certain kind of values, and the idea of propaganda is hilarious, because when you get, if you sign up to Rockstar's mailing list, as I kind of think I mentioned in the book, it comes through from the sender of Rockstar propaganda, right? And it's all this sort of yeah, kind of outsider, anti-authority, sort of like rebellious kind of stuff that they've been trying to curate for a very long time, not only through their games, but who they are as a company, I suppose. So the kinds of sources that I ended up looking at was sort of anything that Rockstar as developer had kind of created and put out there themselves, or were involved in putting out. So in terms of promotional materials, paratext is anything from looking at the actual development of the official Rockstar website, and all the different kind of parts of that website where they're communicating different things about their games or about the company, different kinds of audiovisual stuff like trailers and promotional artwork, to sort of develop interviews and things that were sort of done then, I guess, in collaboration with other big games and media outlets, publication outlets and stuff. So, and I guess why, in the most fundamental way, I suppose, or how I see it, is the fact that this is all part of the experience of what their games are trying to do. And media scholars and some game scholars have been kind of arguing quite persistently and persuasively for a long time that everything around the game is still part of the potential experience of the game. So it's a way, any kind of digital or non-digital kind of real world stuff that you might see that is kind of marketing or trying to sell you something, is a way that you could potentially encounter this game before you then sit down and play it, and the way that you might make some kind of meaning out of it, whether that's kind of positively or less positively. So doing this project and kind of going through and looking for these materials, and once I worked out that was really the focal point of what I was doing, really did make me feel kind of very strongly that putting promotional materials at the center of our analysis is really important for kind of augmenting and sort of developing our understanding of what developers are trying to do when they kind of do history through games. But there was another sort of thing that I guess kind of came out, and when I did start this, I didn't necessarily think that promotional materials were going to be the center point. I thought they were going to be part of it, but I didn't think they were the kind of the key of what I was doing. And it was very kind of like, I'm just analyzing these games and seeing what they're doing with American history. And I think as historians and kind of academics who study historical games, there's sometimes, or kind of has been, a tendency, I suppose, to just look at it through the prism of our own academic expertise on these games. What does the game's narrative or gameplay sort of do, or what does it look like in relation to what we already kind of know about the past, and treating them as sort of case studies in relation to our own sort of expertise and historical knowledge. So as historians, we're always kind of going to see things in certain ways that your average player, unless they're super into kind of the history and historical and all of that, just isn't going to see. So for me, also, I suppose, because there was no way of then asking anyone at Rockstar, hey, why did you make this kind of decision? Promotional materials and all different kinds of these sort of digital paratexts were useful ways of kind of getting at what a company wants you to think about their game, how they want this game to be viewed, the kind of expectations that they want players to have, the sort of interpretations they're trying to encourage people to make. And obviously players might completely reject them. They might not view all of these sorts of things that I'm talking about. They might not bother watching the trailers, even though we know that people really, really love and really, really wait for Rockstar trailers and any piece of information that the company will give to their fans about anything that's up and coming. But yeah, it's interesting to see the kind of insights and that they were trying to offer. So what kind of expectations of a Western game or a noir game did they think that people already have, and how can they sort of lean into that and make it seem like their games are then going to be worth playing to those people? Or how can they sort of shape people's expectations, or people who've had a different experience or a different perspective on this, to say, well, this is what we think, so this is kind of what we not think that you should think too, but here's our way of looking at it. So forget about all the complexity of these things, and here's what you should want and what you should think about when you're playing this.
Yeah, and I had written down in my notes, and I've got them here. I describe this, because Rockstar as a brand is very famous for its kind of satirical look at American society, but they're also really famous
Mm,
for being very standoffish in terms of the amount of information that they give. They don't do many
yeah.
interviews. And so I kind of looked at this as kind of a way to reverse engineer authorial intent with
Mm,
these paratexts. We're using the promotional material to kind of get at what is it the Hausers, Dan Hauser in particular, with something like Red Dead. What are they trying to
mm,
say about America? What are they presenting? And you make a very persuasive argument in the book about how these promotional materials they are really important for kind of setting up guardrails for how the player will understand the history that is being presented,
mm.
right? They are through things like Rockstar recommends, through the newswire, through the literal Rockstar propaganda, what they call propaganda. They are setting up for the player the game world, but then they are also kind of making an argument as to why the game is compelling based on the historical material. I think that's really, really important, is that it's not just about this is a really cool game, right? It's not just about the open world. It's about this is a historical game, and this is cool because it's got history in it. I think that's is
Yeah.
really well presented by this book.
Yeah, and I think it's the fact that what was so sort of interesting to me in looking at these kind of sources is the extent to which they felt they needed to do that because you wouldn't have thought necessarily. I mean, other than the fact that at that point, as Rockstar products, Red Dead Redemption and LA Noire in kind of 2009 to 2011, they were unproven Rockstar products, right? They hadn't sold on the scale that any Grand Theft Auto game had sold, that nobody knew what to expect of them. you know, Other than that, it's interesting to me the extent that they felt they needed to kind of do that. They could have done, a completely different sort of approach to sort of marketing. And yeah, it's a really interesting marketing strategy that to have these games running in sort of parallel in terms of when they were released, but the way they were being marketed, to have them marketed exactly the same way. I mean, beyond if we're thinking about obviously the broader connections between the Western and the noir as sort of like forms of genre, if we want to call them that, or kind of cultural expression, like it's just really interesting that at this point in time, the company were really, really trying to sell it, but they weren't just trying to say, yeah, as you say, these are amazing games. They're going to be awesome. They're going to be Rockstar games. We've already proved ourselves with Grand Theft Auto. Like they were saying that, but they were also saying, look how historically valuable these
Yeah.
are. Look at all the true things we're going to be telling you. And like you get to experience what it was like. Why did they feel the need to do that? It's not like these games weren't going to find some kind of
Yeah.
audience. So yeah, it was really, really fascinating.
Yeah, so some of these sources you're dealing with from Rockstar Newswire, from Rockstar Recommends, these are kind of segments that used to be on their website, used to be a part of promotional emails. And I was blown away with kind of the amount of surface level historical research that they do present, but so much of it is written through kind of traditions of historical media, including American cinema. Right, they are
Mm,
not necessarily coming up with these methods on their own, but they are kind of relying on how have these histories been presented by other media in the past and using that as the basis. So I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit more about what kind of material are in these promotional Rockstar Recommends Newswire, but then also how are they drawing inspiration in this promotion from American cinema in particular?
yeah. I mean, on the way I talk about it in the book, I talk about these two kind of parallel sort of discourses where on and they're kind of parallel, but they also really, really overlap in what they're doing. There's the kind of the very sort of I say traditional, but it's not traditional, the kind of historical authenticity stuff where they're saying things like, look, these are all the things going on in the background of these stories. And one of the really sort of memorable quotes for me that always sort of sticks in my brain is one of the really very first ones for Red Dead Redemption, where they're talking about so one of the blog series was called kind of Bad Guys Gone Good and Vice Versa, where they were talking about real people who were kind of wavered in their sort of the way they behaved on different sides of the law, kind of like John Marston
Mm-hmm.
does. So the way that kind of opened this blog post is, unlike the pure fantasy of most video games, the kind of the conditions that amount to John Marston's backstory are very real. So you've got these kind of, and it's unlike the pure fantasy of most video games, is if this these games are not also kind of pure fantasy, right? But they're not, they do have these important touchstones. So there's things like that. There's, here's all these real people. And for Reddit, it's just fascinating the way that they kind of offer these insights into here are the actual kind of historical processes that are going on, like the development of kind of mass communication and, the development of technology and things. It's not as if they were kind of getting things wrong. There's like huge things that they're obviously getting very right about this game. But yeah, it's the way that, yeah, as you say, the kind of the surface level way of sort of engagement with what they're doing. It's kind of like, here's a bunch of different, like, you can go read some Wikipedia articles. There's even some academic sort of like JSTOR stuff hidden in these kind of blog posts you can go away and read. But it's all really taking the complexities of kind of obviously historical research done by historians and turning it into this lovely little narrative of here's what the American West was like. And here's what you're going to see in Red Dead Redemption. It's like a complete heir apparent to all of these things. And for LA Noire, it was kind of, very similar. Here's the real crimes that happened in 1947 that we did the research about in Los Angeles, that we then made kind of fictionalized versions of cases for. So you're going to be interfacing with kind of like real things and real things that happened and, real places. So there's this, and I guess it kind of boils down to, here's this world that you're going to see. And yeah, here's all the kind of the background history stuff. And this is all really authentic. So therefore your experience of this is going to be authentic, even though, as you say, it's a completely kind of superficial rather, very kind of condensed, narrowed version of what it is. But so much of those expectations, those historical narratives are completely defined by what you would expect if you have like consumed all of the popular culture that surrounds these things. And the fact that they are doing this kind of discourse of historical authenticity alongside and overlapping with this sort of discourse of cinematic authenticity, as I talk about, is the fact that, these things play into each other really, really well, because there is just so much overlap in the way that they're trying to draw from and take inspiration from kind of prestige cinema and noir films and Western films, and the way that they're talking about historical authenticity, not just because obviously these genres, the Western and the noir are entirely steeped in a certain kind of historical period that people associate with them. So, whether you're talking the 1930s and 40s with noir and the kind of wartime or post-war kind of angst of it all, it's very much hard-boiled up within that genre, or with the Western and the frontier and its kind of closing and the place where Americans were supposedly made Americans, if we're going to go with the kind of Frederick Jackson turn of it all, the white Americans were made white Americans, or whatever. But it was sort of very clever, I suppose, of them to acquire these franchises from other companies like, Red Dead Revolver from Capcom, and obviously Team Bondi did co-develop LA Noire with Rockstar, because they do make so much sense as part of Rockstar's portfolio as a company that's clearly very invested in doing stuff about a real version of America, but completely doing it through the prism of, what other, mediated histories have done. This is not trying to be the histories that you find in sort of books and articles, but it's the ones that you've already seen on screen, the ones you already know. So to historians, obviously, this is very clearly a kind of past that's steeped in the myth that's come from sort of popular culture. And yeah, like I said, even there's lots of things that the games are getting right in terms of the, broad themes or the visual specificity of different things, or the stuff that actually did happen at certain points. They're never solely intended as the kind of approved history that historians would sort of like, check the box, like, yeah, they've done all this kind of right. But they were never meant to be, because so much of what they're doing is clearly, the history maybe probably comes second after the fact that it's the genres that really they're taking stuff from. But also their very specific idea of what these genres are, not the big complexity of these genres and the different kinds of people within them. It's a kind of very, very narrowed image of that too. So it's like these two narrowed images of the history and the genres put together, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really well done in the book. I think you're writing on LA Noire in particular, going through the meaning of noir in general, and then also presenting how film scholars have interpreted it, how historians have interpreted it, and then now how Rockstar has done it. I mean, I think that's some of the best writing in the book, and it's definitely stuff that I'm hoping to crib from like my future work. It's like, oh, okay, well, who's written best stuff on LA Noire and Rockstar? It's this is Esther's book, right? I'll just go back and steal copious amounts of material from that, with citations, of course. But it's interesting to me. I think being a historian with a PhD in British history, it's fascinating to me of the British origins of Rockstar and the Housers in particular, and the ways in which American film is so powerful to a British conception of what is America. And I think you can say this with the Housers, but you can also see this with British films that come out, the cinema of Christopher Nolan, the cinema of Sam Mendes, cinema of Edgar Wright. I'm sure no relation to Esther Wright, but Edgar Wright in particular, a very powerful influence. And, all of these British directors and what their ideas about American society are through their film. And I think the Housers kind of fit into that, and the Housers see themselves as part of that tradition of, kind of British authors, British directors casting their gaze to America. And, I think they play that up in the interviews that they've done, the limited interviews that they've done. But you can also see that clear influence in these pieces of paratext that you look at. You look at, Rockstar recommends in particular all these films that they list out that you could look at. They obviously care a lot about this. And, even though we don't have kind of archival sources or, kind of deep developer diaries for Rockstar, at least not yet, I feel like you've done a really compelling job of kind of reverse engineering that thought process through looking at the promotional material.
Yeah, and it's fascinating actually that you mentioned like kind of Christopher Nolan and Edgar Wright, because I had I can't remember if it made it into the book, but definitely in the thesis there was a footnote specifically that sort of talked about or mentioned Christopher Nolan and Edgar Wright, because what I find completely bizarre, and I don't know whether it was because I was just so down the rabbit hole of PhD at that point, and that you start seeing everything is connected to everything, right? But when I think it was Dunkirk came out, and also Baby Driver came out, they must have been within the sort of the scheme of me doing the PhD. There were there were articles that were published that was like, here's the cinematic influences of these like auteur directors. And that is exactly, it was all these kind of, big war films, or I can't remember what the ones were for Baby Driver, but it was exactly the same tone as like Rockstar recommends. Like, you're going to play this game, you're going to watch this film. Here's your kind of like cinematic antecedents. It's very much this playing into this kind of like auteur branding that they are clearly courting in some sense. Here's the vision, and here's where they've drawn from their kind of like proper cinematic and cultural ancestors to make a game that is, or a film that is therefore all the more authentic, because they are well versed in the kind of history of what it is that they're trying to do. But yeah, I mean, I think as well with the sort of the broader point about Rockstar's British identity and how they've kind of never, that's always been sort of so intrinsic to the branding, despite the fact that, and obviously because Rockstar North still in Edinburgh, and the British origin of the houses and all of that, but it is now a very kind of multinational company, and so much of it being done out of New York or San Diego and other places in the US. But the fact that has remained so core to their identity is clearly one of the reasons why their games have for so long been so regarded as kind of satire and critique, that they were offering this kind of outsider, quote unquote, perspective on America, and that they could be so critical. But what I kind of wanted to do, or sort of do a little bit in the book, and well, hopefully successfully, I don't quite know, but it's to sort of undercut that a little bit and say, well, actually, clearly they grew up just obsessed with American culture. How critical can you be of something that you are so clearly in love with? And so clearly, okay, I'm not saying these games are not critical and not satirical, but how meaningful, how kind of biting can that satire be when you actually love it, and you are still propping up so much of it, and you are clearly drawing so much of what you know about these periods and these things from these films and from these kind of bits of popular culture. So I've always found that weird tension point with Rockstar and their kind of claims of being these amazing kind of like cultural critics and satirists when it's just they're just repackaging stuff that they loved when they grew up, clearly,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it reminds me so much. I did my doctoral work on looking at the history of international policing. And so it was a focus on the British, and their obsession was always with crime in America. They were always obsessed with, I was looking in the interwar period, so it was a lot of talk of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and all of these books. And even then, even among, professionals, police officers, administrators in Britain, they think that American crime is really what they see in these books, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes later on in these TV shows and these movies. And I feel like the Housers and maybe some of these directors really do fall into that same sort of category, right? They know better. Like if you sat them down and talked to them, they would know better. But
Yeah.
also the artwork that they produce seems to
Yeah.
say no, actually they don't, or they don't care. They don't care about the
Yeah.
consequences. I don't know. Maybe that's something we can look forward to if they ever publish developer diaries or something like that. We can get to the real heart of it. But I feel like you make a good case here of, like you said, undercutting that a bit. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. With the work that you're doing here, looking at these promotional materials, you had some difficulties that you talk about at great length, in particular in the conclusion, about collecting sources for this book. And in particular, with these kind of promotional materials that are not meant to stay around, they're meant to be kind of ephemeral, trying to boost pre-orders right before the release of a game. And I'm wondering, could you describe for our listeners, what was it like to collect sources, particularly when the things that you're looking at are designed to be ephemeral? They're designed to, be there and then leave. And then also, what is it meant for you to have to go back into, Internet Archive and look at previous versions of the Rockstar website, which I'm sure was super, super, super annoying. Just talk a little bit about source collection.
Yeah. It was, yeah. It was a weird process because, like I said to begin, completely, I guess, full disclosure, I didn't sort of realize what I was doing when I started doing it. Partly because I'm a very traditionally, in this, I have a BA and an MA in history, right? I'm a very sort of traditionally, in that sense, trained historian, but I was never trained in the kind of digital history that this ended up being, or at least not formally trained. So it was kind of nightmarish at times in trying to find, once I figured out what it was I was actually doing, it kind of it's easy to find things accidentally, but then more difficult to find or to work out, okay, what is the sort of the sum of stuff I could find. I didn't even
Yeah.
know what the kind of the because I had played before my PhD. I had played Red Dead. I'd played LA Noire. I hadn't, I'd sort of encountered GTA games and stuff like that. But I wasn't like a super fan, which obviously was helpful, but it meant I wasn't really aware of the kind of things that Rockstar did, even on a kind of personal level, let alone a professional level. So a lot of it, yeah, became kind of nightmarish with the Rockstar website. So that in itself was difficult because I was seeing things when I started, unpacking and kind of looking at different things on the website. I was obviously seeing things by the time I started the PhD, like 5 or 6 years after they'd actually been published. So that was one thing, right? So lots of luckily, a lot of the newswire stuff that I talk about is still there. You can still go to the links, or but what's there doesn't look like it would have looked like in 2009 to 2011, and that's part of the problem. Like, they use a lot of trailers and embedded a lot of links and stuff, some of which have now completely rotted or just
Yeah.
things disappeared. There are a lot of instances of kind of where they were clearly encouraging fan or kind of player interaction. So a lot of polls that are now completely dead. Obviously, I never, could work out what they were. There were at one point when I started, underneath all of these posts, they encourage people to kind of like sound off in the comments, and there were comments and people talking about like their favorite westerns and people, noir films, and people interacting with these posts. And I was kind of looking at these things and thinking, oh, cool, like for future, that's something really useful. And then at one point, the website got completely overhauled, and it was at some point where the social club sort of must have got integrated into a different way, and they all just vanish. And I was like, why didn't I save anything? Like, so yeah, there was a lot of way back, and that was, I think that was really the point where I started realizing, okay, I'm kind of unprepared for this in some senses of what, or really when I started realizing that that ephemeral kind of nature, what you were talking about, is kind of is so important, and sort of to be a bit more kind of like, right, what am I actually doing? I need to be a bit more sort of, um, just thinking about it, and thinking about what needs to be kind of saved, what can be saved, because yeah, the Wayback Machine is great for some things, but is not a kind of complete way. You can get, some interesting things of how the Rockstar website looked in, different points over the last 20 years, but you're not going to get a
Yeah.
full kind of like complete. You can access some of those comments and things, but it doesn't, the Wayback Machine doesn't cache everything. So I learned a lot about sort of doing digital history before I actually realized what I was doing, mainly by making kind of mistakes, and things that I do differently now, and I think about differently now, and would obviously do differently again. But when it comes to, so that, the Rockstar website was one kind of beast in itself, that I sort of, was very lucky that at least the Newswire stuff, even if it looks differently, a lot of the text, a lot of the content, so it was still there to talk about. You can still see what the official websites for Red Dead and LA Noire look like, even if they're sort of slightly differently configured and things moved around a bit. But it was actually the stuff where I was trying to find things outside of the Rockstar website that was sort of difficult, like finding, as you say, the very rare instances where they do developer interviews and actually talk about, people like Dan Houser, or sort of the creative execs give interviews and talk about things. I was kind of lucky in that so I was looking at the Newswire and what was happening around the time the games are coming out, because they were reposting stuff. They were kind of saying, look, check out this interview that we did with, I don't know, GameSpot or IGN. Like, here's Dan Houser's like marathon interview that he did with, IGN. So those were kind of there, but there was also a little bit of actually just kind of really creative Googling, of trying to find stuff, and even things that I found, developing interviews that I found by the time I kind of got, a certain way through the PhD, and we're kind of going back to them, the website's like gone. Games press just buy like doesn't exist anymore. Can I find this on Internet Archive? Maybe.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things you mentioned Google there. One of the interesting sources that you had talked about were YouTube video annotations, which in many cases were completely gone by the time that you'd gotten to the source. And but in some cases you had listed something out. So in chapter 4, I had written down this footnote, footnote number 132, and you had mentioned at the 1 minute 5 second mark of this video, it says, for an annotation, quote, find the 20 hidden police badges in GameStop's Bad Pursuit challenge to unlock Phelps's Button Man suit and additional XP. And I love this footnote because this is like, oh, okay, yeah. So it is like kind of building part of the promotional material for the player, but it's one of these kind of, it encapsulates kind of the ephemeral nature of this. Like, this is a pre-order bonus that is only available from one seller in North America, at least. And I just think that, but this is like, for us, and speaking generally about historical game studies, this is a great source, but it's also like one of these weird things, like, if you were to tell me 10 years ago that I would be reading a book in which somebody would be making reference to a YouTube annotation about GameStop, I would just be like, you're crazy. But this is the kind of stuff that we have to do, I think, going forward. It's going to be more common.
Yeah, and that video is just annoys me to no end, that because it was at some point, I can't remember the date, I think it's just probably one of the footnotes, the point where YouTube stopped supporting annotations, because this was just a completely wild and fascinating source where you've got annotations like that. And then you've got stuff like, this is a real person, who was around in 1947 LA, and this is John Noble, who's famous from Lord of the Rings, playing like this shady developer. Just completely all of the different levels of, it's such a good illustration of the kind of overlap between the historical authenticity and the wider kind of cultural authenticity that they were going for, as well as talking about the gameplay and like, here's what you can do in the game. So it was all these different levels of stuff they were trying to kind of like mash together to make people think about. And that there was at some point that obviously then I went back to, I think he was in the process of kind of revising it, the thesis into the book. And I was like, oh my God, they don't work anymore. And part of me having to explain them in footnotes what they
Yes.
actually said and give the timestamps was because I did have some screen caps,
Yeah.
but then for various copyright reasons, and I couldn't actually include just not getting a response from Rockstar about including things in images in my book. So obviously we're not going to do that for fair use or not fair use reasons or whatever. But so that's another thing that's really, really challenging is when you can't use kind of the screenshots and stuff that I did have saved. How do you explain things as well? Because in that same chapter, there's another issue that I had about explaining the way that so much of like the things that you do as Phelps, the way he investigates objects and picks
Yes.
up things,
Yes.
and the way that the camera actually shows you things is just so shockingly similar to the way that you see things in films like LA Confidential or in
Chinatown. Yeah.
Chinatown. Yeah, it's
The
exactly
finger
the same.
thing in Chinatown, I
The
thought that was
finger
really,
thing,
yeah, that was
yeah,
really
yeah.
good. I was like, man,
Around,
this blows my mind. I was like, whoa.
but like how how do you explain a video game, right? I
Hmm.
mean, at least with the film, I was like, okay, I can't use the image, right? Let's go to the film. Let's find the timestamp here. If you go to this film and watch this,
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson running his finger down a
In the
legend, and you
archive.
go
Yeah.
to this, yeah, like
Yeah.
that you go to this game and this mission, and then you look at how do I? There's no timestamp. It's just I promise it's in this mission. Go and do it, and then you can see this thing that Phelps is doing, and it's exactly the same. Um, yeah, but this is yeah the ephemerality, the fact that they just disappear,
Yeah.
and how are you supposed to? I haven't quite, if anyone knows a way of getting these things back, like great, please tell me because I haven't figured out a way of doing it. They just stopped supporting stuff and now it's
Well,
gone.
yeah, I know. And, as somebody who's been on YouTube for 10 years now, History
Mm,
Respawn, I can tell you that there's all sorts of things, there's all sorts of comments, there's all sorts of audience engagement things in particular that have completely changed and it's just
yeah.
lost, and even somebody like me who's been running one of those YouTube channels, I don't have access to any
Mm,
of that stuff anymore
yeah.
either. And,
Yeah.
once a feature's gone, it's gone. And it is really important, if you're interested in kind of like maintaining this legacy of these videos, of these annotations, is really important to download it while you still have access to it.
Mm,
And I do that, once a year. I will go through and I will make sure for History Respawn, I'll go and make sure it's like, okay, do I have this video downloaded? Is this the version?
mm,
Just in case somebody wants it or if it goes away someday and there needs to be some sort of record. And, I can't imagine how many game companies are thinking like that. I can't remember, I can't think of any marketing teams that would think like that. I don't know. And so, I think when we talk about video games, and listeners will be aware of this too, that there's a lot of talk about, kind of lost video games and needing to
mm,
maintain video game hardware, needing to maintain data ROM, ROMs of old games, software, and how some of that's being lost. And we have things like the, Video Game History Foundation trying to do some of that work,
yeah.
the Strong Museum trying to do it, the National Video Game Museum in the UK trying to do that. But I also think that there is a lot of material that you talk about, the promotional material around a game that is being lost at maybe even at a faster rate than the
Yeah.
games themselves.
Yeah, and it's I think as you say, I just don't know if developers they don't they see the value, or I mean I don't want to speak for game developers because I don't know, but I think it's easier maybe if I speak in a more general way to see the value in preserving games and
Yeah.
preserving hardware than it is. And also perhaps, I know that's complicated. It's obviously complicated to preserve these things, but it's even more complicated. How do you even begin to think about how we preserve all of this stuff that's
Hmm.
just kind of randomly in different places? How do you even make decisions about what you do save? Because this is the fact that, I mean, I've been sort of increasingly reading more stuff about kind of doing digital history and the kind of the technology and history, by dint of realizing what I was actually doing with this stuff, but in parts of my job as well, and thinking, well, okay, how do we need to be teaching future historians about this, because it's already kind of too late to not be teaching future historians about this, because so much of what they're going to be encountering already is born digital, or
Yeah.
digitized, and is kind of, we are just not prepared, like as a profession, for this. Like we're really not. So how do you begin to make decisions about what's important if a developer and a historian, we're not going to necessarily agree
Yeah.
on what the important
Exactly.
thing to save is? Like how do we say, oh, we need you to save all these things, so we can study them in the future when we don't even really know
Yeah.
what, it's just there's so many questions. And yeah, which is why I'm so glad that there are these kind of seems to be ever increasing conversations and initiatives and stuff that are happening, or people are becoming much more aware of the fact we need to preserve these things. Um, it's just how do we even make decisions, and how do we then do that?
Yeah. Well, I can say having gone to the Strong, having gone to Library of Congress, done research on games, I'm very thankful to archivists because they're the ones who are
Mm,
actually going out and trying to get these sources before historians even
yeah,
realize they need them. So we'll
yeah,
just rely on
yeah,
librarians and archivists to take care of
yeah. Of
this for
course,
us. Yeah. And we'll be
yeah.
bumbling in the dark. Yeah.
Yeah, historians always being well behind the curve of realizing what we actually need to be doing. Definitely, yeah.
All right, so kind of a last question here. This book, it does a really good job of analyzing Red Dead Redemption 1, LA Noire, kind of coming out of your postgraduate research. These were the games that were out when you had started that process and when you were researching initially, and kind of the main focus of this monograph too. But I'm wondering, what about the publications from Rockstar since LA Noire, and in particular, what kind of influence did the publication of Red Dead Redemption 2 have on your analysis of this topic?
When it was announced in, I think, yeah, 2016, I was about a year or so into the PhD, and I already had a pretty good idea of what I was going to focus on, and it was just focusing on the first Red Dead and LA Noire. So it kind of, when it was announced, it kind of hung over me like a kind of cloud, sort of wait, thinking, okay, well, is it gonna, the PhD is only ever sort of, a certain amount of time, right? I was like, is it going to come out at a point where I then feel like I'm kind of compelled to, meaningfully incorporate it, or is it just going to be way, way too late, and then I'm going to feel terrible that I didn't incorporate it? And I think it was sort of slated initially to come out in 2017, and it did eventually then come out sort of late 2018. So I finished my PhD was pretty much kind of in the end stages by that point. It was kind of handed in March 2019, I think. So it was it was far too late to really kind of meaningfully incorporate it in that way, but it did. I went to the midnight launch of Red Dead 2, and then spent about 2 weeks solidly playing it and sort of ruining my life that way. As a kind of, I need to like write about these things, and obviously talking to you, History Respawn, about it. So I was thinking about it constantly from that point, and thinking about, okay, where does this fit? And the point where it did fit in the PhD was in the conclusion, as a kind of, here's where they are now, as a way of reflecting on a lot of the stuff that I had actually talked about in the thesis. And so when it came to then revising, turning the thesis into a book, I did sort of question, like, do I have to? And I still sort of wonder, I suppose, to myself, should it have been more sort of integrated into the actual kind of the main body of the text, into the chapters, because it mainly only I only really talk about it in the epilogue, but at some length, I suppose. But I think if I had sort of threaded it through more, it would have maybe unbalanced a bit of what the book was trying to do, because the book, is very much about capturing a sort of quite specific moment in time of when Rockstar released these two games within sort of a year of each other, what they were doing in terms of the promotion. It kind of has a logic in that sense. And the fact is that with Red Dead 2, they hugely stripped down the kind of promotion that they were doing. For Red Dead Redemption 2, there were lots of things that were the same. They had the kind of the gameplay series videos, the trailers, obviously they had a very iconic artwork. It was all branded in a very similar way. But I was almost waiting, when we got closer and closer to the game, to Red Dead 2 coming out, for the sort of resurgence of Rockstar Recommends. I was waiting for these blog posts to come back, but there was nothing. And it's odd, because in 2017, so I guess a year or so before Red Dead 2 came out, when LA Noire was remastered for the next generation consoles and for the Nintendo Switch, and they released it as a VR, the VR case files. They did revive Rockstar Recommends for a single blog post, where they used Lady in the Lake, like kind of older noir film, to sort of talk about the experience that you would get through the kind of the words of I think it's Philip Marlowe from the all that sort of stuff. So not even, or I guess kind of a year before, they were still actually using Rockstar Recommends as a legitimate way of selling the experience of LA Noire. But then it was just I spent a long time trying to work out, well, why did they not do that then when Red Dead 2 came out. And I think they just didn't, like, who needs to sell another Red Dead Redemption game at this point when that single image was tweeted in 2016? They were kind of backpedaling. You know, people like, the sort of Take Two saying, please don't expect another GTA 5. Like, this is just, people were going absolutely, yeah, it was a lot. So they
Hmm.
didn't need to kind of prove themselves. And what I sort of use the epilogue to talk about a little bit is the fact that they didn't need to prove themselves anymore, that they could be trusted to create a Western game. They didn't need to show they're working out, and they didn't need to show all the research they've done, or that they watched all these films, because it was always going to be a success. Now, that sort of didn't, even though obviously the critical reception to the game was, completely off the charts. It was the most realistic game ever. It was so historically, authentic. They redefined the open world again. It was never going to get anything other than that sort of praise. But it didn't mean that what the substance of what Red Dead 2 was actually doing, in the way that Rockstar was sort of revising the West and the West, and even if it was set so many, a decade or so before the first Red Dead Redemption, beyond the surface level of, having kind of more women characters, having more people of color, being a kind of more expansive vision of the West, it's still this kind of very Rockstar, very Red Dead Redemption, very tied to a particular way of seeing the West and who's important and whose stories matter. Um, so yeah, I think I could have done it. I still wonder about whether I should have done it, but I think it sort of works much better as something that is distinct, because it was so distinct from what I was
Yeah.
trying to talk about. They changed the way that they were selling this because they didn't really need to sell it anymore. And also, and I mean, another thing that kind of again, ruined my life is that I tried very hard to map all the promotion. And I did try and save like everything that I
Yeah.
saw, because I knew that I couldn't have done that with the first Red Dead. And it would just made me realize how absolutely impossible that is to do, because I was like getting stuff, there was all the Instagram stuff, there was the Twitter stuff, there was the Facebook stuff, there was the website stuff. It's just, it was a real kind of humbling moment of the fact that any one person is only ever going to be able to see a very partial
Yeah.
part of the possible experience that someone might have of this game and its promotion. So even just for that, and for giving me that kind of insight of, how we need to think about promotional materials, it was sort of useful too.
Yeah. I think what you did ended up doing with the book and kind of incorporating a little bit of analysis of Red Dead Redemption 2 at the end was useful, because I think, like you said, there is you almost didn't need to do a full on analysis of Red Dead Redemption 2, like, multiple extra chapters, because there was so much consistency in the
Mm,
view. And, I think, like you had argued persuasively, they'd already done a lot of the work of kind of promoting their specific historical vision with the promotional material for Red Dead Redemption
yeah.
1. And, as a player, not as a scholar, as a player, I don't remember any of the promotional stuff for Red Dead Redemption 1. I just didn't think about it
Mm-hmm.
in the same way back then when I played it. But then being aware and consciously thinking about the promotion of Red Dead Redemption 2, I was struck in the book by how consistent that messaging was for, the promotional material in Red Dead Redemption was, as the limited ways in which that history was promoted in Red Dead Redemption 2. So I
Mm,
was kind of saying to myself, I was reading, your analysis of Rockstar Recommends and Rockstar Newswire. I was like, oh, they mentioned this stuff for Red Dead Redemption 2, but here it is in Red Dead Redemption 1, a game that
yeah.
I didn't think about as in the same way, in the way that we think about it now as kind of this historical narrative. I didn't think about it like that when the
Yeah.
game came out. I wasn't aware of the promotional material, and yet, I was reading it saying to myself, oh yeah, okay, so this kind of thing that they were doing for Red Dead 2, they had already established, they staked their claim here for
Mm.
promotion of Red Dead 1. So I think that consistency helps a lot, right? It's kind of like if you were to do a full blown analysis of Red Dead 2, it would just be kind of repeating yourself, I feel like, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and yeah, in part of the fact that there was just less to talk about, and I do talk about it a little bit in the kind of the epilogue, but yeah, I felt like I talked about it sort of to the extent that I was happy with, because as you say, there is so much consistency, and I don't know how much of that consistency comes from the fact that they are tied so much to the fact this has to be John Marston's backstory, right? The fact that even in Red Dead 2, you spend so much time like just literally laboring as John Marston at the end of that game. Like, I
You
think
think you're
that,
done after 40
yeah,
hours of Arthur Morgan, and yet there's another 20
there's
hours. Yeah.
yeah, there's always more kind of nails to hit into the timber in the house or whatever, But yeah, and the fact that parallels at the end of Red Dead 1, all of these kind of things. So yeah, I don't know whether it's just the fact that because expectations were set, because they sort of announced themselves so clearly with the first Red Dead, and people were expecting a follow-up, even if it was going to be a prequel, and it always had to be a prequel because Red Dead 1 took place way too late anyway for the story they were trying to
Mm-hmm.
tell. But they were always confined to it having to end at a certain point. And clearly their interpretation, their sort of view of what the Western is, what the kind of Western they're interested in telling, like that hasn't changed. So as you say, what would be the point of reperforming all of this stuff? Like, here's Rockstar as historian, what we have to say, because they've done it. And it's laid bare in either the stuff that's still on their
Yeah.
website or on in the game
Yeah.
itself. So now it was like, here's the characters, we can do these expansive developer interviews. We can still do these kind of they still made like great artwork and all the kind of usual like pseudo historical stuff, that like the kind of compendium of zoological creatures and things. But I think what they were trying to do so much, because they'd already proven their sort of they claim as American historian or American Western historian with Red Dead 1, is so much of it was about selling the open world, because it was so much of that game's promotion was the spectacle of the open world and how big and how much stuff there was. That was really the kind of the through line. It was like, we took what we knew with Red Dead and we just amped this up, but we
Mm-hmm.
didn't really change the substance. It's just now there's more stuff for you to go and see and do. So yeah, why do you need all this kind of words and research and film? They don't need it. People want to play a Rockstar Western game.
Yeah.
So
They were
yeah.
already bought in at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Rockstar, speaking of their brand, they're kind of famously tight-lipped about their development process. They are famous for having basically a closed shop, between development of games, and they really only open up right as a game is about to be released. We are recording on the 19th of September. This is the morning after we have had the major kind of leak of Rockstar Games, kind of one of the biggest leaks in game history, in which
Mm,
a kind of anonymous Reddit user posted dozens and dozens of videos featuring kind of alpha build footage of GTA 6. So I'm just curious, what do you think of this? What do you think it says about Rockstar? What are your kind of initial impressions about this massive leak from this famously kind of close knit, tight lipped company?
yeah, I mean, my kind of initial thought when I saw it, I've been trying to kind of stay away from looking at it too much, because I think like a lot of fans who seem to be just, judging by, Twitter, people are kind of disappointed that they've had that moment ruined for them of like when the trailer drops,
Mm-hmm.
But I just feel it sucks for the developers, like
Yeah.
really, really sucks for the people who've been like laboring over this for, who knows how many years to have it kind of come out that way. Yeah, it sucks, but as you say, it's even stranger, because yeah, Rockstar are, and yeah, that's even what I write about in the book, is the fact that they only talk to the press, they only talk when they want to talk, when they have something that they want to share. So this is yeah, this is kind of an epic level of kind of violation in lots of different ways, for the way it's sort of sharing these things that are not quite ready to be shared. But I think it's just such an anticipated game,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not, but by any means a kind of like saying that this is an okay thing to do, because it's really, really not. But it's just such an anticipated game that any morsel of information that kind of breaks through, and with the kind of revelations that were sort of circulating before these videos of maybe having a woman as one of the kind of protagonists. It's been a thing since before GTA 5 came out. Oh, are they going to finally have like a what is this is the revolutionary moment in gaming, is for Rockstar to finally put a woman like protagonist in one of their games. This is it, the thing we should be aspiring for. But yeah, so even before all of this, that those little snippets that kind of came out, I can't remember when it was, maybe a couple of months ago, that there was going to be two playable protagonists. It's going to be set in Miami. That what was really really interesting or kind of indicative to me was that it was like, oh, and it's going to be sort of loosely based on Bonnie and Clyde.
Yes. Yes. So here we
So
are. Dan Houser is gone, right? Dan Houser is off doing something else. Sam Houser's still there, but Dan Houser is kind of
mhm,
the origin point for a lot of this kind of history, cinema, what have you.
mm,
And yet, even after he's gone, we have this kind of reference to America's past, but then also kind of direct reference to an American cinema classic, Bonnie and Clyde. I think that.
yeah.
What do you think of that? What does that tell you?
Well, it's perfect and disappointing in equal measure, right? I mean, it's the least surprising thing because, of course, if you're going to have a woman, it has to be only through the prism of something that's already been done in cinema, right? You can't
Mm-hmm.
just be a woman character, a brand new woman character in her own right. It's got to be a woman character that fits the blueprint of something that's already got like the seal of approval from being a really really famous film. So I think that's the kind of the weird sort of initial feeling I have about it. I mean, why do we want, why do we expect that, what is a woman being at the center of a Rockstar game going to achieve? Is I don't have an answer to that question. I have no idea what to expect from that when you have this company that is just almost synonymous with the kind of misogyny and stuff that you can do in these games. I'm genuinely curious what just putting a woman at the center, and it's like just in the same way of just changing the kind of the race or ethnicity of a character, just changing the gender of a character, like, is that meaningfully going to change anything? And then, yeah, as I said, the fact that it's clearly being done again through the prism of kind of established popular culture, is that a good sign that we're going to be seeing anything that is a kind of meaningful engagement with kind of contemporary, if it is a kind of contemporary set, maybe possibly seems to be a contemporary set sort of game, um you know is looking back to the past and the cinematic past really going to be the key that unlocks this? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
we know basically, even despite all of this, we know basically nothing
Yeah.
about this game. And great, cool. When they want to announce it and unveil it to the world, everyone will be waiting, right, to see what it is that they do. Me alongside all of them, because I'm really interested to see what
Yeah.
they come up with next.
Yeah. It just so fascinated me to have that, well, to be reading your book and then also have them talking about Bonnie and Clyde. I was just like, boy, here they go again. Here, it's like the GTA San Andreas meme, here we go again. This is the same
Yeah.
stuff over again. Even though Dan Houser's gone, and,
Mm,
maybe he had some significant influence on the early development of this game and the story. That's completely possible, but yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see, like everybody else. And I thought, it's kind of interesting to me reading this book. Thinking about kind of the long history of American history being written through popular culture. I think you make the point kind of again and again in the book that it's not necessarily Rockstar's fault that these kind of tropes keep appearing.
mm,
They are again heavily influenced by American cinema. They're heavily influenced by American, popular fiction. The book Blood Meridian comes up several times.
mm,
So it's not necessarily their fault that they are kind of repackaging these tropes for video games, but they do have the potential to do something different, right? They don't necessarily have to you know, present the history in this way. They don't have to present American society in this way. And I'm wondering if that cycle will be broken in GTA 6. What we've seen so far, I couldn't tell you. The Bonnie and Clyde stuff doesn't bode well, but I do wonder, like, could they do something different? Could it be different? Could it have meaningful representation of different groups and not just kind of the traditional Anglo-American white male narrative about America, society, and history? I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, what you were saying is that, in the sense that it's not just their responsibility. I didn't want the book to just be me kind of wagging my finger and sort of saying, oh, look, this is all terrible. As much as I'm kind of trying to sort of point out, look, this is what they're doing in relation to the broader kind of complexity of stuff, and that they have made, as you say, they have made decisions about what to do when they could make decisions to do other things. So the way that I kind of wanted to end the book on something a little bit more hopeful, even in just like a couple of sentences, about this is one of the biggest companies with one of the huge amounts of resources, huge amounts of kind of fan dedication. As much as that waxes and wanes sometimes, and people are annoyed about GTA Online or Reddit Online or whatever, they are a company with just like so much money, so much power, so much potential to, and these games are fantastic games, right? They are so grand and spectacular, and the ability to do what they offer, like they are amazing gaming experiences. There's absolutely no kind of like denying that. So I kind of just wanted to be a bit more hopeful of like, if they could just, if there could be any decisions made, if they could just be a change of perspective in terms of who the company wants to see as important, what kind of stories they want to tell, what kind of history could they, and sort of we like, what could we possibly imagine? Like we could get these games that, could do just so many other things.
Yeah.
And it's not as if there's not great stories that are, or histories that are waiting to be told. And, for a company just to sort of, I know game companies are risk averse, I get it. And I'm sure that for all me sort of saying this very, utopian kind of sentiment, there's going to be fans, going to be gamers who are going to absolutely lose it at the thought of a woman, and probably already have lost it at the thought of a woman at the center of a Grand Theft Auto game, as they do with the center of any game, historical or otherwise. But, all it maybe takes is one company to just say, well, we're just kind of going to double down on this and do it, and to just find other stories, find other films to base your games on, right? You don't know, no one's saying you have to stop doing that. No one's kind of saying to change the approach. Other films are available. Other books are available. Other things are available. So I don't know. I kind of try maybe sort of to remain hopeful, but from what we know, who knows how hopeful we should be.
Okay, well, on that somewhat hopeful note, that brings us to our end of our episode. Esther, thank you so much for joining me.
No, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for having me.
So Esther's book again is Rockstar Games in American History, Promotional Materials and the Construction of Authenticity. And this is published by DeGruyter Press, and you can find out more information about this book, where to purchase it, and then also where you can have your institution purchase it for you in case you're an academic, by going to degruyter.com. So good luck with the rest of the promotion of this book. I hope it sells a lot of copies. I hope institutions pick it up. I think it is a wonderful addition to kind of growing literature of historical games. And, it's kind of one of these academic books that I've been anticipating for a very long time, I feel like, and it's delivered. So 2 thumbs up. Good work, Esther.
Good. Thanks. I'm glad it didn't disappoint.
All right. Until next time, listener, goodbye.